So welcome everyone to my keynote on the journey to responsible AI in financial services. My name is Daragh Morrissey and I work in Microsoft in the Worldwide Financial Services team. And today what I want to show you is how we think about responsible AI. This is a space where we're learning very closely with our customers and everyone is learning all the time. So let's jump into it. So AI isn't just another piece of technology. It could be one of the most fundamental pieces of technology ever created. This is a quote from our CEO, Satya Nadella. And we can see the amazing power of technology, but with amazing power comes great responsibility. And AI can be used both as a tool for good and as a weapon. We want to make sure that everyone is building AI for good. And what we want to do is lay out our principles and practices and tools to make this possible. When we think about use cases for AI, there's a number of categories that we put them in. AI has delivered transformational ability to transform the customer experience. AI is a great way to personalize that experience when you start gathering all the data around the customer's preferences. We've seen AI used for servicing customers, for example. With COVID-19, we saw call centers get overloaded as more and more people came through the call center that couldn't get serviced in branches. So contact center is a huge space where AI is being used to improve that customer experience. We also see targeted offers or next best actions being used as a way to engage with customers. During COVID-19, we also saw AI being used here to proactively reach out to customers who were impacted by COVID-19. And this is a great use for AI in terms of helping customers as they run into difficulties. We also see huge opportunities for AI to empower employees in the bank. These can be roles like relationship managers. And with AI, we can bring great insights and data to those advisors. Most of the banks I work with want to augment their advisors to the point where they can service many more clients with the same amount of human capacity. I also see the opportunities for AI in the space of robotics process automation. With RPA, we can use AI to convert something that was previously analog, such as a paper document, into something digital. And lastly, in the space of providing deeper insights and intelligent action, AI provides great opportunities in the space of financial crime, for example. AI is being used really heavily in the space of anti-money laundering. It's also used for KYC and fraud protection. And these are great use cases where you can actually deliver real business benefits in a very quick way. Lastly, AI is being used to manage risk. So when we think about credit scoring, for example, or underwriting and insurance, this is a space where AI is being heavily used right now. So a couple of things, as you start to build out AI, there's a couple of questions that you need to ask yourself. If my model has made a mistake, why has it made the mistake? How can I understand and trust the impact of my model's decisions? Does my model satisfy legal and regulatory requirements if I'm asked to explain it to a regulator? And is my use case considered high risk for AI? You also need to ask yourself, is my model protected? Could it be reproduced or stolen? AI models are now presenting a new attack surface for cyber attack. So if you think about a cyber attacker coming in and changing your model, are you able to detect that? Because they could do serious damage if it's not adequately protected. So in Microsoft, what we're trying to do is drive progress in responsible AI across 3 dimensions. The first one is principles. And we'll talk about the principles that we've laid out for ourselves. These are not principles that we're laying down as the ones that everyone should adopt. It's more to share our own journey, and we're helping customers lay out their own ethical principles around AI. We're also taking this through to practices and policies. And lastly, we're making this real with tools and technology. And this is how we're going to lay out the conversation today. So here are our AI principles at Microsoft. Along the top, we have the pillars of fairness, reliability and safety, privacy and security, and inclusivity. And these are built on foundations. And these foundations are transparency and accountability. In the space of transparency, we need to understand how AI is actually working. And in accountability, we talk about how we manage the AI risks through existing management frameworks inside the bank. Let's talk about responsible AI sensitive use cases. One of the most common places we've seen banks get into trouble is around denial of service. Earlier this year in the US, we had a high-profile incident where somebody applied for a credit card. This was the wife, and she applied for a credit card, and the AI denied her the credit card. She was earning more money than her husband, who happened to be an influencer, and he went viral with the announcement that his wife was denied credit. What actually happened in this scenario was that there were biases in the data where the AI decided not to give the wife the credit card. And you can see pretty quickly how something like that could create serious material risk or reputational risk for a bank. Also, it's also important to make sure that we preserve human rights in any kind of AI that you build. It's making sure that we don't do anything with the data that infringes on their privacy or security. In terms of transparency, what we want to do is avoid building AI that becomes a black box, essentially. And we do this across three areas: transparency, traceability, communication, and intelligibility. In the space of traceability, what we want to do is show the lineage about how the AI solution was built. We want to communicate very clearly how the AI was built. And intelligibility is about being able to explain how the AI is actually working. In terms of sources of AI risk, AI creates all kinds of risk across these three areas. You need to make sure that the data that you're using to train the model does not have any biases in there. The model itself needs to be built in such a way that you can explain it. And also the usage scenario is one where you can run into trouble fairly quickly. It's really important that we point AI at the right business problem and make sure that we ethically review how we're going to apply AI in this scenario. One example I can share is in the space of facial recognition. We had a discussion at Microsoft once about the use of facial recognition in branches, for example. This is a bit of an AI ethical minefield if you don't do it in the right way. To do facial recognition in many parts of the world, you need to make sure that you have the consent of the user, and it needs to be done in what we call controlled scenarios. One example where it's okay to do facial recognition, for example, is when you're signing up for a new account and you need to provide you provide consent to give your face into that recognition process. So let's talk about risk management. And when we think about our guiding principles, banks have to think very carefully about how do they manage the risks around AI. And one of the patterns that we're seeing being really successful is banks using their existing risk management frameworks. Banks have been managing financial models for a very long time, such as Basel II, for example. And what all you need to do is use those existing risk management frameworks, but extend them for AI. Some of the ways that you might additionally add some additional considerations for AI are in the space of, data set and model inventory, transparency, impact assessment and impact approvals, information protection, how you make sure that the data is secured, and model monitoring. And we'll talk about some of the tooling you can use in a moment. When we look at the toolkits that we have, in terms of understanding what your AI is doing, we have a toolkit called Interpret ML, which gives you great insights into how your model is performing. In terms of fairness, we have tools that can detect biases in data or patterns of data that will drive to the wrong outcome in terms of an AI model. In terms of protecting data, we have toolkits that look at things like differential privacy. So differential privacy is where you selectively mask data as it's stored in the cloud. If you think of an Excel spreadsheet, this will be masking out certain columns and rows in the data, or even at a cell level, masking the data. Confidential computing for machine learning is a new technology that we have at Microsoft, which essentially allows you to do encryption of the data as it's being processed inside the server. Right now, we provide, by default, encryption at data at rest, but actually encryption as you process the data and having it completely opaque to the cloud provider gives you additional security. And lastly, through control, we can provide you data sets and audit and management tools to help you kind of trace everything that's happening in terms of the data. So one of the ways you can do this is by adopting something called machine learning ops for AI. You might be familiar with the term DevOps, and this is where we automate the handoffs between developers and testing, and you automate the whole supply chain around building an application. This works really well for AI as well. When you build an AI model, sometimes a data scientist can build it on a small machine. It gets handed off to an infrastructure team to be deployed into production. And during that process, things can go wrong sometimes. With MLOps for AI, we can actually automate a lot of that process. And with this automation comes a lot of benefits in terms of traceability. In terms of transparency, making it real, what we have built is a thing called Interpret ML. So with our tools, what we're doing is two things. We're actually making them available and open sourced on GitHub, and we're also integrating them into our first-party services on Azure. And this tooling gives you great insights into how the AI model is performing. We can see data drift, or we can see if it's performing outside certain tolerances. Model versioning and storage is something else that we've built into our first-party service on Azure. This provides a consistent way to track all of the changes that are happening to the model. We can see if a model it uses certain sets of data, which notebook was used to build the model, where is the code for the model, and then also track how it's running and how it's performing and what data it has access to. FairLearn is a new tool that we just announced at Build in May. And with FairLearn, essentially what we're doing is looking at the biases in data. So we have all kinds of tooling that will look into data, and it could have been something that we could have used in that credit card scenario that we talked about earlier. Again, we look at all kinds of models using this tool. And again, all of this is open sourced on GitHub. So when you think about how you put the right governance in place, one of the things you can look at is how we do responsible AI in Microsoft. What we built was a thing called the Office of Responsible AI, and we look across this governance across 5 different dimensions. We look about how we use AI internally in Microsoft in our internal policy. When we think about enablement, it's about how do we provide AI services to our customers and partners. We want to make sure that everything that we're building is used and applied in the right way across our ethical pillars. We also work really carefully with public bodies and regulators. Again, this is a space where we're learning, we're adjusting our policies all the time. But one thing that hasn't changed too much are our ethical pillars. In terms of sensitive use cases, what we do is take them through a process of review. And if the use case does not meet our ethical bar, we will disengage or not approve that use case to move forward. It's really important if you set this up that you have the right level of executive cover. This organization is owned by our Chief President for Legal Affairs, Brad Smith, who reports into Satya Nadella. So he has got sweeping powers to stop anything happening in terms of bad AI projects. If you're kind of setting this up again, one of the things we found working really well is our materiality questionnaire. So we think about, a number of things. What is this service going to be used for? What is the technology capability to deliver this solution? Essentially, what we're asking here is AI the right tool to be used for this use case? In terms of quality and reliability, we need to make sure that the AI system is going to be maintained properly and tested and tracked over time. And we ask, is there a capability to do that? And then we do a check on, is this a sensitive use case? If this is not going to benefit people, customers in a broad way, or if it causes any kind of denial of service or risk of harm, we'll block the use case. So our approach in this space is to work and learn with our customers really closely. TD Bank is a great example of one of our customers working in the responsible AI space. Usually banks don't like to say publicly that they're working with AI, but what TD have done is come out and said, we are working with AI, but we're going to do it in a responsible way. So we want to learn with our customers, our partners and regulators, and we see this as a journey where we're going to learn together. That's one of the reasons we've put all of our tooling on open source. We don't believe that the industry can be successful if we just put it into our first-party services at Microsoft. And we've also put 2 white papers together. The first one is around laying out the right ethical principles, and the second one is how you make it real in your risk management processes. So we've included the links in the materials that you'll get after the conference. The other thing that we did last year was we took the principles that we laid out and we worked with several customers in Asia around taking their use cases and running them through the process. And again, this is a great example of us learning from our customers and everyone learning together for joint and mutual benefits. So that ends my talk. I hope you've really enjoyed this and I hope it's been useful. And again, we would love to learn more about your journey on responsible AI so that we can learn together. Thank you, everyone.